Every Easter, my entire extended family takes the trip out to my Uncle John's house, who lives way out in the sticks. This past year was no different. Uncle John lives in a huge house that sits on a wide open stretch of land, which is surrounded by woods on all sides. Even though I've been there before, many times actually, I've never actually wandered out in the woods behind his house before. I'm not much of a nature person, so I've never had much of an interest in the outdoors. I was dreading the trip, to tell you the truth. I've never really related much to that side of my family. They're all super outdoorsy, into hunting and fishing and stuff like that, and most of them have lived in the same place their whole lives. Anytime I'm around them, I feel kind of like the odd one out. On top of that, most of my cousins are way older than me, like already married with kids or working on some kind of farm. The only one even remotely close to my age is Kevin. He's a couple years older than me, and actually pretty chill. We always end up sticking together during these family trips just by default. He knows I don't really fit in with the rest of them, so he's usually good about keeping me company without making it weird. Anyway, we made the drive to Uncle John's late Friday night. I'm an only child, so it was just my parents and I in the car. I was exhausted from the drive, so I went to bed almost immediately. The next morning, Kevin and I spent a couple hours in Uncle John's basement playing pool table. Neither of us was any good, but it was better than sitting around upstairs. The house was already packed with relatives by then. You know what the usual holiday chaos is like. We mostly stayed downstairs, low-key avoiding it all. There wasn't a TV down there, so Kevin played some music off his phone, and the two of us talked about some dumb family drama not even worth mentioning here. While we played, Kevin kept going on about the woods behind Uncle John's house. He said they stretched out for miles and that hardly anyone ever went far enough to see the cool stuff out there. He talked about how magical it felt and how beautiful the isolation was. I mostly just nodded along. Nature talk wasn't really my thing, but he clearly loved it. I'm not sure how, but later that day, Kevin convinced me to go on a nature walk with him. Like I said, I'm not a nature person by any means, but I was quite literally dying of boredom, which is probably why I agreed to tag along. We obviously told Uncle John where we were going. He's a really nice guy and always lets us younger people do what we want, a mentality I wish my own parents shared. Kevin took the lead once we got outside, cutting across the backyard and into the tree line like he'd done it 100 times before, which, knowing him, he probably had. The woods were thick, but not totally wild. There was a kind of natural path that Kevin was following. It wasn't late in the day, so I wasn't super worried about the sun setting. But the deeper we went, the more I started to wonder how we were going to find our way back. After about 20 minutes of walking, I asked Kevin if he was sure he knew where we were, and he just laughed. He told me he knew these woods like the back of his hand, and that he'd been exploring them since he was a kid. We'd been walking for maybe another 20 minutes when we both stopped at the same time. From somewhere up ahead, we heard this loud thunk, like something heavy slamming into wood. It didn't sound like an animal or someone stepping on a branch. It was reoccurring, like a pause, then another hit, then another pause and another hit. It sounded like a hammer or mallet being driven against a tree. That's the best way I can describe it. Kevin looked at me, and I could tell he was trying to figure it out too. That sound didn't sound too close, but it was loud enough to be clear. He told me it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that a hunter was wandering around in there, but even so, he definitely looked a little startled. Eventually, the sound stopped. I asked if he wanted to turn back, but he shook his head. I could tell he was curious now, and I'll admit I was kind of too. So we kept walking the direction we thought the sound had come from, both on high alert. We'd only been walking for a few more minutes when Kevin suddenly stopped and held his arm out in front of me. I froze, thinking maybe he'd seen someone in front of us, but then he pointed up into the trees. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing, but then it hit me. There were 3 upside-down crosses nailed into 3 adjacent trees, way higher up than anyone could have reached without a ladder. Easily 15, maybe 20 feet off the ground. Before we could even turn to leave, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around, and to my horror, there was a person standing there. He was dressed like a lumberjack, with a thick beard and a very dark stare. Kevin stepped in front of me, partially shielding me from the guy's view. He stared at me specifically and said, "You shouldn't be here." Kevin immediately apologized to the guy and told him we were just leaving, which is actually what we did. That guy didn't move as we left. He just stared us down as we walked back the way we had come. I could feel my hands shaking. We walked back the whole way in silence, and I've never experienced a more tense moment in my life. The two of us kept turning around, trying to make sure we weren't being followed, but there was no way to tell for sure. When we finally made it back to the house, we told Uncle John first thing. Like I said, he's a friendly guy and he knows all his neighbors, so I got a sick feeling in my stomach when he said no one he knew matched our description of the guy in the woods. He asked us a bunch of times if we had been followed, and we told him no. There wasn't much else for any of us to do. Someone floated the idea of arming up and sweeping the woods, but Uncle John wanted to avoid confrontation and didn't want to lead anyone to his house. So Kevin and I went back downstairs to chill, and the rest of our relatives went back to whatever they'd been doing, likely planning for the Easter festivities. That whole encounter messed with my head way more than I let on. I ended up going to bed pretty early that night, just to get my mind off of it. But because of that, I woke up way earlier than usual, like way earlier. I rolled over, checked my phone, and saw that it was just after 5 a.m. The sun had just barely started poking over the horizon, but it was still mostly dark out. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't, so I just decided to get an early start to my day. Uncle John has a study on the 3rd floor of his house, so I decided to go up there and see if there were any interesting books to read. Uncle John's study has this big old window that overlooks the entire backyard. As I walked past it, something caught my eye. There was a very faint, flickering glow coming from the edge of the woods. It looked like the pulsing light of a small fire, not a flashlight or anything that bright. I stood there for a good 30 seconds just staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I needed to know what I was looking at. So I went downstairs and stepped out onto the back deck. When I realized what I was looking at, I had to literally fight back a scream. There were at least 3 figures standing just past the edge of the woods, each holding a small torch. They weren't walking or moving around. They were just standing there, facing the house, facing me. I ran straight to Uncle John's room and woke him up, telling him what I saw. Without any questions, he grabbed his rifle, threw on a pair of pants, and told me to stay inside. He marched out onto the back deck and scanned the yard while I watched from the doorway. By that time, though, those people had retreated back into the woods. Without hesitation, he aimed his rifle up into the air and fired it 3 times. That woke up the whole house, and the next 20 minutes or so was complete chaos. I'll just tell you that I can't think of a worse way to spend an Easter morning. The whole holiday was kind of ruined after that, and everyone was on edge for the entire day. Eventually, it came time for my parents and I to leave, and I can't say I was upset about it. This was like 9 months ago, and Uncle John has since told us that he hasn't seen or experienced anything strange. Still though, I would hate to be living in that house, knowing there are psychos lurking somewhere nearby. I'll send an update should Uncle John tell us anything of note. It was my first day working for this plumbing company. I was called in for my first job to this house out of town. The plumbing company had 5 employees, and the owner would choose who does what job. I don't see it as a coincidence that I was sent to some undesirable job far away in a shitty area for my first job. The call was for a leaky pipe under the sink, which is typically the easiest, most basic job to get a call for, depending on the root cause of it. I pulled up to the house, my first ever call, and it was an absolutely disgusting looking house, completely run down as if no one had lived there for years. I went up to the house and knocked until a middle-aged man opened the door. I didn't like his aura from the start. He had this unflattering, disproportionately wide smile that made his entire face appear off-putting. His voice was also really soft and high-pitched, not the voice I was expecting to come out of his mouth. Or maybe it was, given his unusual appearance. He welcomed me inside of the house. I realized there wasn't a single piece of furniture in the house. "Just moved in?" I asked him. He replied yes and then chuckled. Or maybe I should say he giggled, because it was just a weird, high-pitched little laugh. He brought me to the kitchen, and the first thing I did was set my stuff down on the counter, then open the cabinets under the sink. I slid myself under the sink and started to examine the pipe, specifically looking at the P-trap and the lock nuts to make sure they weren't overly tight or loose. I noticed the man was standing directly over me, his legs spread wide so that I was sandwiched between both of his feet. It was extremely uncomfortable. I asked him politely to give me some space, and he backed up a bit, but not enough that would make me feel comfortable. I realized that I didn't see any water leaking at all, so I got out from under the sink and tried running the water, but no water came out of the faucet. I looked at the weird man and asked him why the water wasn't running. He said he must have shut off the main water valve without realizing it. When I say I stood there speechless for a few seconds, I'm not exaggerating. I asked him bluntly, "How do you do something like that by mistake?" He smiled and shrugged his shoulders. I asked him to go turn the water valve back on. He turned and said he'd be right back, and I saw him leave the kitchen, but then I heard footsteps walking upstairs. I'd never in my life heard of a water valve being upstairs in any house. I knew something was off with this guy and the situation. Everything from the condition of this house to his mannerisms. And then I started hearing multiple sets of footsteps from upstairs, coming down the steps quickly. In a split second, I decided I was out of there. I grabbed my stuff and quickly walked out to the front door and to my van. I'm a pretty large and loud dude, so I'm not really intimidated very easily by people in a physical way. But there was something about that situation and that guy that told me that some shit was about to go down. I looked at the house for a second, and then I drove away. I called Dave, my boss, letting him know it was just some kind of prank, because that just sounded better than me saying I was scared of that guy. I did a few minutes worth of investigating and found out that that was just a vacant, abandoned house. I got the number that made the call for the alleged leaky pipe from Dave, and it turned out to be a voice over IP number, not even a real number. I reported this shady encounter with the local police department just so that they would be aware of it and maybe close off that house. I've never had a reason to return to that sketchy part of town again. I only worked for that specific plumbing company for about a year. This is a fresh story happening pretty recently. My family and I were driving to college to help me move in, as I'm currently a first-year student. Once we arrived, I found out that I would be living in a Jack and Jill, which means you and another room share the same bathroom. So essentially, I'd be living with 3 other guys. I already knew one of them in the other room. We met at orientation and got to know each other. His roommate doesn't matter for this story though. It's my roommate Demora who I'm going to talk about. I got his socials beforehand and we exchanged information. Prior to moving in, I tried talking to him on Instagram to get to know him better, but his replies seemed dry. On top of that, his profile seems like one of those Discord mods that you see on Instagram Reels or TikTok. Once we moved in, I met him and ironically, he looked like a Discord mod, except he had a skinny build around my height. He looked very pale and had a peach fuzz mustache. I tried talking to him again. His talking style matched his texting style and seemed very introverted. He stuttered a lot and always tried to end the conversation as quickly as possible. I tried to lighten him up by asking what kind of music he listens to, but he said he doesn't, as music wouldn't fill his cup of emptiness. To make things more weird, when he set up his PS5, he immediately started gaming. It's not him gaming that's weird, it's what he does when he games. Demora makes these weird grunting noises, violently shakes his body, and laughs when he spams the controller, and he puts his feet in his desk cabinet, occasionally grabbing his feet and pulling them towards his body during his shakes as well. He whispers to himself as he plays by himself or with his online friends, and he usually repeats what he whispered twice in a gigglish manner. He stays in the room 24/7 and almost never does homework. His movements alone freak me out as I'm trying to sleep. But there's more to this story. Sometime around the first week, I went out with some friends that I met in my dorm building, and I came back pretty late to my dorm, around 1 a.m. Demora looked asleep in his bed, so I nudged it off. As I went to my cabinet, which was right next to my bed, I felt my arm hairs get goosebumps and felt the urge to turn around. So I did. Demora was staring right at me with a slight grin on his face. I yelped and said, "Holy fuck, Demora, why are you looking at me like that?" He laughed it off and said, "Dark time," and turned around to face the wall. This creeped me out, and it happened, I want to say, 3 more times. I tried to move out, but my college said they didn't have any dorms open, so I tried to move into the other room, but one of the other roommates didn't want to leave as well. This meant I was stuck with Demora for the semester, and I just had to deal with it. About 3 months passed by, and I come back from my English class. When I opened the door to my dorm, Demora stood up in a panic, asking me why I'm back so early. This was weird, as my English class actually ended late, hence me getting back late. I asked him if he needed the room to himself, and he declined, striking some weird pose that looked like it was from some anime, and he said that I shouldn't be worried at all. I visibly cringed at him, and his statement only made me more uncomfortable. I noticed he had a box on his desk, and when I brought it up, he told me that it wasn't important. I shrugged it off. At this time, I noticed that my iPhone charger and my scissors were missing. I asked Demora if he saw it, and he said he had it. He handed me the scissors, and as he was handing me the iPhone charger, the cable knocked his box over to me as well. The box opened, and what I saw made my heart sink. A sticky note that had my name on it fell out. Alongside this was what looked to be a see-through case. Inside of it, eyelashes, a pair of glasses, a pair of my socks, and a disposable photo of me that I took as a joke. He collected all of it up off the floor as he tried explaining the meaning of it, and I yelled at him to get out. He left immediately. I texted my RA the situation, and he told me that he was out at the moment, but when he comes back tomorrow, to show him the box as evidence so that they would have a reason to kick Demora out. So I got the box and hid it within my laundry bin. I felt really rattled, and the sight of my roommate disgusted me. However, in an hour, he came back. I just told him to stay on his side and not to talk to me. After that, no words were spoken. I tried to stay awake out of fear that he might try to find the box, but after it being a long day, I fell asleep around 2 a.m. When I woke up, I saw Demora was gone, and it felt good seeing him out of the room for once, but then I remembered the box. I went to my laundry bin, and it was gone. I panicked, and not long after, my RA was knocking on the door. I let him in and told him the story. While he did believe me, he said he can't do anything without that box, otherwise he'd just be going off my word alone, which isn't much. I felt like I was losing my mind. The RA left, and about 5 hours later, Demora came back. I asked him what he did with the box. He played dumb and said, "What box? I don't know what you're talking about." I pressured him to stop playing dumb, but Demora kept denying it. I couldn't stand, look, nor be in the same room with him anymore. It's now second semester, and yes, I'm still dorming with Demora, unfortunately. He did let me know that he will never do it again, and that if he does, he'll let me know and we'll move out immediately. I took his word, and we're still dorming as of today. However, I stay out of the room as much as I can. He still creeps me out. And the worst part is that I can't sleep sometimes, nor focus during the day, as I keep thinking of what was in the box. Why did he steal my photo? Why did he steal my socks? What were the glasses for? The part that leaves me scared each time is what those eyelashes were doing there. And perhaps weirdest of all, was he labeled the box with my name. I used to go bowling quite often with my friends when I was young. I'm talking like 12, 13. There was a bowling alley down the block from my friends and I, and so we'd go there on weekends. The bowling alley has been closed for years, but when it was open, it was super cheap and affordable, perfect for a bunch of young teenagers who didn't have money of their own. This one weekend, I went with my friends Jacob, Josh, and Mikey to the bowling alley. We always went at night. It was likely around 8 p.m. The bowling alley was always crowded on the weekends, and sometimes we'd see familiar faces. There was this older man who would sometimes be there alone, bowling on the adult side of the bowling alley where alcohol was served. We always played on the non-alcoholic side. How we took notice to that man was because he'd sometimes just weirdly walk down the entire bowling alley, passing every lane, watching people bowling. Then we'd notice him end up back at his lane all by himself. We nicknamed him Creeper Bob after maybe the third time seeing him. Tonight there was a lane open next to us, and guess who out of nowhere sat next to us? Bob, or whatever his real name was, but I'll keep referring to him as Bob. He was setting up a game on the lane next to us by himself, and it wasn't long until he started trying to talk to us. He started making comments on our form, and every so often interrupting our conversation to tell us weird things like how long he's been coming here. Then eventually he said something really weird, that he watches us play every weekend from across the bowling alley, and he decided to come over and introduce himself tonight. He played it off like he was trying to be some kind of bowling teacher to us, but really it was just annoying and most of all uncomfortable. Bob at one point entered our lane as I was up to bowl, and he grabbed my wrist with his hands to position me into an allegedly better form. I never gave him permission to touch me, nor did I ask for his guidance. We were only like 13 though. None of us stood up and said, "Yo, get lost," or something like that. I could just feel the unease amongst my friends. Every moment of that man touching me, I felt more and more disgusted. We cut our night at the bowling alley short because of him. We used the money that we would have used on more games on getting pizza instead at a pizza place further out the block. When we came out, Jacob and Mikey went their own ways since they lived on a different block. Josh and I walked back down the other way in the direction of our houses. As we did, the sound of a car engine starting made us turn around. We noticed an old SUV like a Ford Explorer banging a three-point turn. We both imagined the possibility of it being Creeper Bob. The SUV started slowly tailing us as we walked down the street, so we picked up our pace. Then the SUV pulled up right alongside us, and the window rolled down. It was in fact the man from the bowling alley. He said out the window that he could offer us a ride home. We said no thanks. He replied it's not safe for a couple kids to be walking around late at night. We weren't even really that young. We were young teenagers, not little kids, and it was crazy that he thought we were young enough to trick into getting into a car. When we made it clear we weren't getting in, he pulled to the side of the road and parked his car. Josh and I decided to start jogging home. When we reached the intersection where we'd split off, we said bye and I continued jogging home. By the time I made it back, I was out of breath. Running after eating pizza is not a good idea. My dad was already asleep because he worked weekends. My mom was out with her girlfriends most likely, and the same was probably the case with my sister, so I wasn't supposed to ring the bell because my dad didn't want to be woken up. I went around back to get the key we had for the back door, which was hidden in the shed. When I got out from the shed, I thought I heard something, and I should have listened to my gut. I went to the back door to unlock it, and as I opened the door, I heard the sound of someone running up behind me. Before I could fully turn around, someone pushed me inside the house, covering my mouth and wrapping their arm around my neck. I wasn't able to see who it was because I couldn't turn my head. I scratched and clawed at the man's hand until I could move my mouth just enough out of the grip of his hand and scream, "Dad." I may have only been 13, but I was able to put up enough of a fight to get him to lose his grip a few times, allowing me to scream. This undoubtedly scared him off as he finally let go for good and ran outside. I didn't look back. I ran up the half flight of stairs to the main floor and yelled for my dad. My dad came rushing out of his room, and after telling him what just happened, he checked the backyard and all around the property and then came back inside. I told him about the man from the bowling alley, how we nicknamed him Creeper Bob, how he followed Josh and I in his SUV after admitting to stalking us at the bowling alley. My dad filed a police report and tried getting the bowling alley to release the video surveillance from that night, but they refused. I was never allowed to go back there after my mom found out about this. Not that I'd ever want to. The crazy thing is, technically I can't say with 100% certainty that the man who came in behind me and grabbed me was the man from the bowling alley. But realistically, how slim are the chances that it wasn't him? This particular story took place when I was in the Air Force and stationed in Louisiana. I won't mention the name of the base, but I'm sure that there are many people out there who will know which one it is once I make mention of some of the details to this story. This story took place a few years after I had been stationed there. I first arrived to this base in 2006, and upon my arrival, I, along with many other new troops, were greeted with many different stories of horror. There were stories about a man in a top hat who walked a dark, long and narrow dirt road on the outskirts of a storage facility area. There was another story about a crazy man who was hit by a patrol car and ran off into the woods next to the same place. But my story relates to a separate story that was told to me. It was my second night on shift, as I recall. I was posted with an airman who had been there for several years. He gave a rundown about some little girl who had been visiting her father when the storage area we were working in was being constructed, which was well before any of our time. The story went that that little girl was playing on some of the structures while her father was working, but had fallen to her death by slipping off the edge at the top of the structure itself. Most of the story didn't make sense to me at the time, but regardless of the facts, it still scared the shit out of me. To make matters worse, the airman had taken me to the exact place where the supposed story took place. He would shut off the engine and turned off the music as we just sat there in silence. He startled me a few times, but nothing ever happened. Now, skip forward about 3 years. I was scheduled to work that particular spot of the base this night. Keep in mind that I'd been visiting this spot for years now, but at this point, the storage area had been completely closed down except for a few minor areas, which required us to do physical drive-thrus and checks of this area. The shift itself started out rather shitty. Me and my alpha, aka partner, had been given a cattle truck to do this patrol as our normal vehicle was in the shop for maintenance. Yeah, I'm not kidding, a cattle truck. I know this part doesn't seem very important to the story at the moment, but it will tie into the story eventually. So to save on time, let's skip forward a few hours. We were scheduled to do 3 random checks of the storage facility that night, and we had already completed 2 of the 3 prior without any issues. So come about 4 o'clock in the morning, we decided to do our last check, seeing as all the maintenance guys had went home for the night in this area. The only way to access the area was with 2 very large separate gates, which took forever to open. We pile in, lock the gates behind us, and continue on our way. My alpha was driving during this check, and I was the spotter who used the flashlight to check the lock on each structure. An important detail that I left out, which may be necessary here, is that the story of the little girl had taken place on a road within the storage area, which we called Echo Street. By this point, everything was fine, and we had finished our rounds. My alpha makes the final turn down Echo Street. We had both been pretty talkative during most of the night, and we were just shooting the shit, when I got an uneasy feeling. Something felt different, but I couldn't make out what it was. We were about halfway down the road when things became almost completely and frighteningly silent. Even the rumble of our cattle truck and the faint noise of the radio playing seemed to become less audible. As we approached the structure from my previous story, and I must stress at this point that even telling or typing this part still brings a chill down my spine and makes my eyes tear up in fear, but as we approached the structure itself, I turned my head to the outside of the window opposite of the structure, and out of my left ear, I hear a sound that nearly caused me to piss myself. It was the sound of a person groaning or moaning in distress, sort of like the moan of the girl from The Grudge. Yes, I'm very serious. The faint, creepy moan begins to ring inside the cab of the truck between the 2 of us, in between the dark emptiness of the middle seat. I feel my blood turn cold, and I quickly turn to my alpha and yell, "Dude, cut that shit out." My alpha turns to me with a confused look on his face. At this point, he begins to take his foot off the accelerator and asks, "Am I going too fast?" I remain silent for a moment, with my hand in a pausing gesture, and I listen. I hear the noise again. My partner interrupts and asks, "What's wrong?" I quickly turn the music off without saying anything at first, and then I whisper to him, "Do you hear that?" He stops the truck in confusion and listens closely. It was almost dead silent for a second or two when we both hear it this time. That long, chilling groan of a woman. It echoed in my ears. It sounded like someone was struggling to breathe and taking in a giant breath of air while someone was trying to strangle them. The sound was beyond terrifying, and the fact that I wasn't the only one hearing it only made it more of a horrifying experience. I found myself beginning to ask him my original question again, but he quickly interrupts and says with a strong sound of fear in his voice, "What the f*** is that?" We stupidly waited to see if we could hear it again. The rumble of the gates on the back of the truck are easily heard and recognized as they made a sort of metal-on-metal clatter, and the diesel engine has that typical rumble as well. But in between both the noises, we heard it again for the final time. That groan. It sounded even louder. But this time, it sounded like it was coming from both inside and outside of the truck, like we were being surrounded by whatever was making that noise of distress. Without even making a peep, my alpha puts the truck in drive, and he hauls our asses off that street quicker than I have ever gone on any other street in that entire base. He nearly flips the truck going around a curve, but it doesn't bother us one bit. We were both in an unspoken agreement that we wanted to get out of there quickly. We got to the 2 gates again, and I hopped out of the truck as fast as I could. My alpha watched my back as I quickly opened both gates. He jumped back into the driver's seat, sped out, and waited for me to close both gates as well. Once we completed that task, we quickly returned to the main part of the base, and we requested to meet with our flight chief to tell him what had happened. When we finally met up with him, we expected him to think that we were both full of shit, or that we had just imagined the entire thing, being as it was so late into our 12-hour shift, and we were both tired. But I clearly remember him saying to the both of us, "I completely believe you. As a matter of fact, I had something like that happen to me twice, once in that same place, and the other in that building behind you," as he points at our jailhouse. Again, I know that sounds completely cliche with that grudge-like moan we had heard, but it honestly happened, and it still brings those tears of fright into my eyes every time I tell it. I went back to that storage area only once after that, but I never went down that road again, and I never went after dark.